So I'm just going to do a brief, just tell you guys a little bit about Lisa's project before she goes into her reading. It's called Here But Often There. It's a book about the quest for identity in the context of trauma. As the narrative unfolds, moments of engagement and opportunity emerge from moments of crisis in individual relationships, the inner city, and on the world stage. Lisa coined the phrase embedded therapist to describe her unique method for providing real-time psychological trauma treatment. She works with people in their community, a school, a prison, a courthouse, a clinic, a client's house, church, driving in a car. Her perspective is that of the war photographer whose pictures only matter because they are taken in the field of fire. She spends her days working in neighborhoods and countries where bullets whiz by it as a matter of course. Her current work of narrative nonfiction, subtitled The Clinical Adventures of a Bulletproof Therapist, great title, is a book about people who want to do so well but find themselves stuck and suffering. These narratives of healing are drawn from her work in 3 disparate places that have faced seemingly intractable pain and conflict: inner city Boston, Israel, Palestine, and Northern Ireland. Historical trauma, institutional trauma, homicide in the inner city make their mark on the protagonist she encounters. The book is not being written with an anthropological detachment, because this book is about healing relationships between people, not above them or below them, just with them. Lisa finds affirmation for this approach and is inspired by Brian Stevenson, the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, who talks about proximity. And he says, "This is my challenge to you. We need to embrace need. We need to get closer to the problem. Human beings have the capacity, when we get close, of finding our way to justice. When we get close, we hear things that can't be heard from afar. We hear things that can't be seen. And sometimes that makes the difference between acting justly and unjustly." Lisa's own trauma story unfolds at the intersection of these conflict zones as well, and opportunities for positive change emerge. The healing relationships that mark this story conjure a distilled wisdom that can dramatically shape how we interpret violence and we achieve resolution. Please welcome Lisa.
Is anybody else still teary from Nicole? My heart is like, woo! It was my heart. Thank you, Nicole.
I've got more acting to do for this. Playing many characters in this.
I'm always on the kibbutz. I was headed to Montpelier to attend the Vermont College Graduate School of Art Therapy. I'd reserved a place on Swifty's shuttle van to get me from the airport to school. I was looking out the window when the van was overtaken by a pungent, putrid odor. My eyes began to water and I started to cough.
Do you know that in Vermont there are support groups for people who like the smell of a skunk?
Said a rugged woman, buoyant with vitality and springy blonde curls, who turned back from her shotgun seat toward the rest of us and smiled. And while I, along with the other passengers who boarded Swifty's shuttle van after landing at the Vermont airport, was skeptical, I delighted in the possibilities. Breathing in the putrid odor, I considered liking the smell. And then I looked at the water. There was so much of it. It seemed as though, in the ride from Burlington to Montpelier, I saw more bodies of water than there are in the entire state of Israel. Everywhere I looked, it was a lush, lush green.
When the desert thinks of rain, the sand turns the color of mist, and the whole expanse is drenched in a cracked yellow haze that soaks the body in the salty, slick water of sweat. Months go by without even a hint of rain to quench your thirst. The sky is a clear blue palette with no specks of white. Not even in the northernmost tips of the country, where the cedars of Lebanon sway in the Galilee hills, where the cedars of Lebanon rest in between wars.
This was June of 1995. I flew from Israel's Ben Gurion Airport to Burlington, Vermont, with British Airways, where the flight crew called me Love. I prefer to be called Love rather than a knife in the back of the nation, which is what the anti-peace accord right wing of Israel liked to call me whenever I marched in support of the Oslo peace accords, wearing a t-shirt that said, "Peace now, before it's too late," in red and black letters. I, who tends toward the pathologically individualistic, found a we in being in Israel, a we in being a member of a small kibbutz in the middle of the desert, a we in being a part of the Jewish people, except, of course, for those Jewish people, the right wing, who spit at me and told me I was spoiling the wells of our nation, in case I misunderstood their intention. Despite those protestations, the Oslo Peace Accord was signed. The Palestinian Authority had self-governance over small sections of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. We were still negotiating the more volatile issues, the borders of Israel and Palestine, the Israeli settlements, the status of Jerusalem, and the Palestinian right of return. But we were off to a good start. After decades of protest marches, vigils, and small-scale civil disobediences, I could take a break. In this brief hiatus from war and hopelessness, I felt like I could take a break from the business of we and get down to the business of I. Yes, sirree! It was 1995, June, and I was hightailing it to Vermont. The van dropped me off in front of the dorm. The driver handed me my hefty duffel bag, which included my night table photos of my mother, my Tante Xenia, who escaped from the Nazis to become a world expert on Freudian women, and Harriet Tubman. It seemed much heavier now that I would have to carry it up 3 flights of stairs.
I'll take that,
Said a brawny, cheerful, hard-edged woman. She slung my duffel over her shoulder as if it was weightless.
I'm Jody Everyone. You must be the Israeli. You're the last one to get here. I'll show you to your room.
The next morning, she walked me to my intake interview with the dean. Each campus building was guarded on all sides by rich white-barked birch trees and solid oaks. Blooming crabapple trees adorned the broad path between buildings, which were perched on a hilltop.
Why'd you leave your country to come here?
Everwand, who seemed to be in her late 20s, exuded the authority of someone with more seniority. I told her I'd worked hard for peace, and now it had come, and that I was ready for a change from all that hot, gritty, sand in my teeth, sweaty, in-between wars preoccupations. At least I thought I was. But as I entered the dean's office, before I could even say hello, I heard a siren reverberating through the streets of Montpelier below our campus. Oh, is that a Scud missile attack? I hesitated, at once curious and concerned.
Oh no, that siren goes off to let the good citizens of Montpelier, Vermont know that it's noon.
Oh, lunchtime, I thought, picturing craftsmen and women donning coveralls and blousewear from the latest Ben & Jerry's collection. I pictured them wiping sweat from the brow with fair trade red cotton bandanas, unwrapping whole grain fibrous bread filled with Cabot cheese from their wax paper coverlets. I didn't need to go in the Gulf War room sealed by duct tape, don a mask that made me look like a big Johnny bug, or wait for the all clear to call my friends to confirm that neither they nor their houses had been obliterated by a missile raining down from Iraq. I wanted to reassure the dean of my competency and clear-headedness. I said, "Don't worry, if it was a Scud missile attack, I'd know exactly what to do."
Yes,
she said, looking over her glasses perched on the bridge of her nose.
but would you know what to do if it was noon?
She inquired without analysis or judgment. This was before I took a psychopathology class, before I learned about post-traumatic stress disorder. With her preemptive pedagogy, the dean had prompted me to reflect on the possibility that I had become ready for danger at all times. I was hyper-vigilant, always ready to fight or flee. I lived in an emergency mode. At other times, I was numb and shut down. Not because of life in a Middle Eastern war zone, but because I had barely survived the kind of upbringing where love, grief, rage, and social conscience were forever wound up in a tangle of confusion that made a war zone the kind of place where I felt most at ease, where I felt most at home, because I'd become a blown-apart war zone savant. Bombs bursting in air, I was at the top of my game, but I had no idea what to do when it was time for lunch. When Edith Kramer, the great goddess mother of all art therapy, came to speak at our graduation, we asked her,
"What's the most difficult population you've ever worked with?"
Kramer was born in Vienna, Austria, and arrived in the United States in 1938 as a refugee from the Nazis. She was in her 80s at our graduation, but she was still badass. She was a short, feisty woman who'd worked at Rikers Island. It's a jail complex in New York that has housed notorious serial killers like Son of Sam, serial rapists, pedophiles. Kramer also used art therapy in her work with the blind in juvenile detention facilities and schools. We all waited with bated breath for some remarkable story about working with inmates on Rikers Island.
Adolescent girls.
Edith said emphatically.
I've never been attacked by a client. Well, just once, and it was an adolescent girl. They will always hate you. They hate their mothers as a way to individuate. And they will hate you because they will transfer those feelings onto you.
We found this bewildering as we imagined cell doors slammed shut against the back of angry inmates. But then we began to remember ourselves as teenage girls and realized it made sense. At the conclusion of her address to our graduating class, Kramer, who was something of a maverick, had said,
I advise you to maintain yourself, maladapted to all in our society that would stifle independent thought and action.
Inspired, rather than heeding Kramer's cautionary tale, when I graduated, I started an arts program for teenage girls in the Boston area. The Arts Incentives Program worked with young women who lived on the cusp of trauma and disregard, utilizing the arts as an incentive for health and hope for a positive future. They say that from the womb, babies listen to what surrounds them. Some parents ponder whether to play Vivaldi or Bach so their kids can get a head start on culture. In 1960, the year I was born, my mother published an article about her work with street corner girls. The irony was, I only discovered the article a few years ago, after the Arts Incentives Program had all been said and done. My mother was a foot soldier in the battlefields of the war on poverty. When I was in kindergarten, the president signed a $947 million anti-poverty bill into law. The following year, 1965, President Johnson enacted reforms to Social Security and a guarantee of health insurance for the elderly and the poor through Medicare and Medicaid. We watched our mother as she lay on the couch, watching these events as they were reported on the evening news. We snuggled into her, forming one continuous but tangled line. My older brother burrowed into the crook of her knees. My sister leaned with her back against the couch, sitting cross-legged beneath my mother's head, and I sat in the triangle of my older sister's lap. In my lap, I held our cat named Freedom, who my father had found looking for scraps of food by the Lincoln Memorial after the March on Washington. The crowd had dispersed, and my father took the baby kitten into the pocket of his tan overcoat and brought her back to Boston. And so it came to pass that the Arts Incentives Program served young women living with the raw wounds of psychological trauma. I ran the program for 12 years, in which young women and staff challenged me to develop an arts-based, trauma-informed, advocacy-focused youth development model. One of those girls was Jamaica Interlochen. And there's going to be some language here that I might not have put in if I knew you were coming.
But I have to say it, so it's okay.
Despite her name, Jamaica Interlochen did not live on a Caribbean island. She lived in a predominantly Latino housing development in inner city Boston. This posed a problem because she was African American and she was short. I suspect that when she would come up the stairs to our program Tuesdays and Thursdays after school, and my staff and I would greet her with warm hellos and offers of a snack, this is why she would cast her eyes toward the floor and utter in a mildly decipherable voice,
Fuck off.
My staff would respond by saying, what an interesting way to say hello. My goodness, we'd say. That is interesting. Let's all try it, we'd say. And we'd fill the room with a volley of fuck yous and fuck fuck us, until Jamaica would roll her eyes and
You
say,
guys are weird.
then she'd get a snack and go make art or a film. Once she made a beautiful film. The film begins with the camera zooming in on a shot of her arm and a sweat jacket extended, holding a whole basketball in her small hand. She starts out with the following narration.
Strong. You have to be strong to do stuff. You have to be strong to lift heavy things.
It's my favorite movie. If you worked for me, you weren't allowed to tell a kid they were being rude. You had to make meaning of behavior. Behavior is a symbolic form of communication. You have to understand what's being communicated. I called it the Arts Incentives Program because art was the incentive for health and gave these girls hope for a positive future. When Jamaica was an infant, her mother left her on the doorstep of her best friend's residence in the Augustus Victorious Apartments with a note and some diapers.
I'll be back.
The note read, but she never was. Jamaica was also left with fetal alcohol syndrome, a disability that, among other things, stunts your growth, impairs your receptive and expressive language skills. If you live in a rough and tumble spot like Augustus Victoria, and you have fetal alcohol syndrome, you might truly believe, fuck off, is how you are supposed to say hello. But everyone did not agree with our interpretation. Jamaica was always being suspended from school. Sometimes she got arrested. She'd say,
That teacher says I got an attitude.
"What's attitude?" we'd ask.
You know.
She'd say, and give us the teenage, "Well, aren't you a dumbass?" eye roll. Actually, we really don't get it. We need you to teach us.
Attitude,
She said,
is like a knife. If you don't have it, they'll kick your ass. They can arrest me and expel me and suspend me all they want, but I ain't no pussy and I ain't gonna get backed.
that means killed if people on the street see you as vulnerable. Jamaica didn't talk about race, but the girls in the program and people in the city were all about, what are you? Where are you from? Augustus Victorious was always at war with the Templeton housing development down the street. No one could remember how the beef started, but people were getting shot frequently and often enough. Templeton was predominantly African American, and Jamaica's adopted mom, Rosalita, was Puerto Rican, like most folks in Augustus Victorious. Then, one day, she found a kitten on her way from school to our program. Jamaica named her Midnight. We're pretty sure she meant midnight, but that's how she spelled it. In a way, they were like identical twins. Jamaica found her on a doorstep. She picked her up and put her in the pocket of her sweats. She came in quietly and whispered to her mentor, and they walked off together and found a shoebox and lined it with soft stuff. The kitten's fur was dark black. Selena and Jamaica spent hours discussing how best to care for the cat and what it was like for Jamaica to nurture her. Then one day, Jamaica didn't show up for program, and Selena said she got an emergency call and ran over to Jamaica's house, and a few hours later, Selena called in to say that Midnight was dead, and that she and Jamaica had been trying to find where to give a proper burial to the kitten, but everybody wanted hundreds of dollars, or there were long waits at the pet cemeteries, and it was so very urgent to Jamaica that Midnight get a proper burial. So Selena and Jamaica and the dead kitten in the box came back to the art room, and the mausoleum was prepared. Selena promised Jamaica that we would give her a proper burial, and she could go home to do her homework. In required courses on cultural competency, they do not tell you what to do with your client's dead cat, who represents a positive affirmation of their sense of Black identity. Oh no, multiculturalism is theoretical. But here we were, Selena and I considered the public health hazards, the legal ramification, the gross factor, and the clinical implications, and finally realized that the only option was to bury the dead kitten in my front yard. It's a small patch of land, maybe 6 by 6 feet. I assure you, I did not convene a meeting of the trustees of my condo association or the ethics committee of the American Art Therapy Association. I did recite the Mourner's Kaddish and the Jewish tradition, and Selena summoned an Aretha Franklin gospel tune.
Still waters run deep.
2 years later, we were sitting in the art room, and Jamaica leaned over and said,
You have a gray hair in your head. Can I pull it out?
Well, I said, it seems like gray hair should be something that we value as representing wisdom and experience and just beauty of a different kind.
It's ugly and I want to pull it out.
Well, Jamaica, I said, I don't think it's the best thing I could do, but I have a feeling that if I trust you enough to very quickly and carefully pull out this one hair, and only one, we might learn something about trust, okay? So Jamaica quickly and carefully pulled out the gray hair. Then she looked at me and said,
You know I used to swear a lot.
Really? I said, rubbing the weeded spot.
Yep. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Really? I said, why not?
People shouldn't talk that way. It's not nice. It hurts people's feelings.
Really? I said.
Yep.
She said, that night, as I cut across my patch of yard to get mail from my mailbox, I tread carefully so as not to disturb midnight, who slept soundly and eternally below my garden, which grows wantonly and wildly, unpruned and unrestrained. So now we're moving over. That was the decade of the girls. Now we're moving over to the decade of the boys, which is the second section of the book. And this is the impetus for me writing a book. Everybody in Boston wants to figure out what to do about the problem of youth violence. And they have these big community meetings, and big, tall people say big, tall things. And one of them is this very highly respected Reverend Jeffrey Brown, who you can see in a TED Talk. And he says, the problem of our youth today is that they lack a moral compass. And that really pissed me off. Because that is not the reason we have youth violence. And that is why I'm writing this book. And hopefully the next vignette might illustrate for you how I try to offer an alternative way of looking at things. Jason, who I've known for many years, and he's in a school, a high school in inner city Boston that has the highest homicide rate. And he doesn't go to school that much. It's a little inconvenient when you have to worry about getting murdered on your way to school, or when the police stop and frisk you every 5 minutes. And so he doesn't go to school that much. That's why they asked me to help him. And his English teacher says it's so frustrating. Whenever he does come to class, he's so smart. He totally gets it. But it seems like he just doesn't care. He's not paying attention because he doesn't show up. And they just happen to be reading the book, Night by Elie Wiesel. Jason is lactose intolerant, but makes an exception for pepperoni pizza. His here and now adolescent brain cannot hold the memory of the severe stomach pain he endures at the end of that meal. He was shocked to find out that you could order a cheesesteak without the cheese. I've never seen him eat a vegetable.
Fries, Lisa Lise.
He reminds me, pointing to his side order of fries. Oh, right. Those are potatoes, I say. Doesn't count. I'm picturing a forlorn food pyramid banished to the gulag.
But these,
He says with a tinge of disgust.
are not fries.
He points to his abandoned plate as if it is he is an anthropologist deciphering glaring distinctions between two indigenous tribes on a remote and distant continent.
Too thick.
It amazes me that someone so hungry can be so discerning about what he is willing to eat. Chicken wings, hamburgers, and the aforementioned. Period. Despite the grease and sauce inherent to his diet, there's never a speck of dirt on Jason. Not a drop. He wears a glistening white t-shirt. When we eat, he has this way of softly rubbing his thumb against his index finger, quickly back and forth, and then in slow round circles, until eventually any crumbs or grease magically evaporate. I'm the before, and Jason's the after of the OxyClean commercial. At the upmost corner house of pizza, Jason's face relaxed as the steam from the hot food rose from the table. What should I ask him that I haven't asked? What about church? I was trying to picture how it all works in this life of his.
We used to go when I was younger. But whenever we walked in there, I'd fall asleep, even if I wasn't tired. I don't know what it was. I'd just sit down and I'd fall asleep.
Maybe because it was so peaceful?
I don't know, maybe.
What about now? Do you go now, I asked?
I guess I'm like that Eli guy in the book Night and his friend Moish. I'm having a crisis of faith.
He stopped for a moment to look at me, and then he continued to put the leftovers on the aluminum tray for his family and snapped the plastic cover shut. Did you really just say that? My eyes filled up with tears, and Jason nodded like somehow he got what it meant to me. I remember the passage I'd learned by heart after my mother's death.
After that day, I saw him often. He explained to me with great insistence that every question possessed a power that did not lie in the answer. Man raises himself toward God by the questions he asks him. He was fond of repeating, that is the true dialogue. Man questions God, and God answers. But we don't understand his answers. We can't understand them, because they come from the depths of the soul, and they stay there until the death.
And now, at the Upman Corners House of Pizza in Dorchester, on Columbia Road, where the Boston Police Department's cameras dotted the streets to register gunshots in real time, this Jew was thrown for a loop, an eyewitness to Jason. They would stop and frisk him all they wanted, but never find what he had hidden. He'd been paying attention all along.
So we want to open it up to you guys for questions for both Nicole and Lisa. I would just ask, as people ask questions and you guys answer, if we can repeat the question so everyone can hear it first. So any questions for one or both of them on these pieces?
Wait a minute, dramatic difference.
I had a question, if it's okay to start. There's the obvious similarity that both of a lot of your protagonists are of adolescent age, and then the story you told about the art therapist saying that was a. Did you guys talk about that at all, by the way, when you were?
Yeah. She was very happy that, there it was, the issue of beauty and the issue of what it means to be a girl and similar themes.
I guess my question is, do you feel like that's a really significant period of time where you can really change a person from a very developmental?
Yeah, I mean, for me, adolescence is the most important time in a person's life because it's the task of adolescence is to define your identity. And so, given that my book is all about the quest for identity in the context of trauma, adolescents taught me that. They taught me that, I would come in and, I'd be pressured by people who funded my program. Their grades have to improve and, they got to go to college. And, they wanted me to do like a little dog and pony show with these young people. And I would say to a funder, really, we just want them not to die. And, and they would say, well, you're never going to work in this town again. So I wasn't always that popular, but when you really want to help people, you have to become part of the story. It can't be, I'm over here looking at you and I am going to change your life, I'm the great white hope. No, you have to be willing to discover yourself. And that's why I have that story at the end. Because everyone looks at this young man, Jason, who's now 21, and they think, oh, he's a thug. You know, they wouldn't be thinking, he's thinking about Moish and Elie Wiesel and having a crisis of faith. And I stand there in the middle of this neighborhood, you know, knowing that the police cameras are on me, and I just say, I am the luckiest person in the world. Who the hell gets to hear this? Who the hell gets to really know this person? I mean, this kid barely talks at all. He's like talk is cheap. Why should I talk? Nobody listens. And yet I get to be privy to these moments. And that's why I do the work.
What's so interesting, and this is not at all part of my, but what I presented is that I've been for the past 15 years an arts educator in New York City in every capacity, working with the same population as Lisa. So while it's not, I mean, I created this piece that I presented here on the Upper West Side with a specific group of students. My whole experience has been working with students and groups using art in the same way that Lisa does.
So when we decided to read for each other, we just automatically knew how we needed to sound. We didn't even need to say, okay.
I've had a lot of her students.
Yeah.
How does being this idyllic, peaceful place affect your work and your thinking process? Because this is certainly isn't New York City. What do you find here that's different?
I'll just stand because I was doing the same work as Lisa in New York City, sometimes 6 days a week, almost all day, teaching 6 hours a day, music, theater, dance, all different ages. And so it's the most draining and exhausting thing you could possibly do. So this is like a time for recuperation so I can get back out and do it again. Because it truly is, and there are so many brilliant artists in New York City that dedicate themselves when they're not doing their own artwork to doing that. But it is extremely, I think have more stamina than I do. She's sturdier than I am. It's hard for me. But I love it, and it's incredibly gratifying.
I mean, I love that question, and thank you for asking it. I mean, can everybody just give a round of applause to all the artists here? I mean, for me, I have like these pearls, you know, of wisdom and experience from all over the world and from all art forms. And I can, you know, stomp around and go, oh, shit, I'm stuck, you know. And someone will go, oh, have you tried this? Have you checked this out on YouTube? Oh, I know someone who did something like that. Have you read this book? You know, oh, why don't we take a walk? Oh, why don't I take you to get your hair done and get you some earrings? You know, so it's just a place where you can for me, it's a place where I can deliberate when someone's life doesn't have to depend on the decision I make. Every day in my work, people's lives depend on what I say and what I do. If I go to court, if I say the right thing, if I say something and they calm down and de-escalate, if I antagonize a judge, if I get stopped by border police while climbing over the fence into the Palestinian territories to do an art therapy group for Palestinian social workers, you know, and here it's just me and the paper and like the girls. And I just, you know, I am so grateful. I am so grateful. And I would never, these are pieces from a novel that's like a book that's like 350 pages long. And I had to like pick from different elements to put them all together. And I never would have been able to do it without the help of everyone here.
Well, it's also the space and the time to process that kind of, I think when you're in New York City and you're doing this kind of work, you're experiencing so much and you're seeing so much and you're taking it all in and you're just trying to get through the day and you're trying to hold the space for everyone else. And so it's like you really do need a space like this to process and hopefully to create work that's influenced by it, that gets the word out, because you don't have time to process it when you're in the middle of it. I didn't.
I mean, literally as I was out the door to come here, like, and I was trying to get my last bag, which had all my book in it. There was an emergency, and a kid's mother came by and said, "Oh, I have to talk to you," and I forgot my entire manuscript, and it had to be mailed to me. So that's just kind of an example of what this is a safe haven from.
It seems like you very deliberately use the comedic lens to soften some of the intensity. I wonder how intentional. I imagine it's totally intentional, but I'm curious about that because I feel like it's just such a great thing to use in life, period, and in writing about something that's really challenging and hard to stomach for people maybe that don't know about the intensity. But anyway, I don't know if there's a question in there, but I'm curious about the intentional usage of comedy.
Well, I can tell you a quick story about my commanding officer from basic training in the Israeli army, who today is one of my best friends. And the first time I was in New Jersey and she came to visit me there, it was her first time in the United States, and we were sitting in a train station, and she said, "You know, it would be so great to have a Holocaust in this country because the trains are always on time." And that's Israelis. I mean, that's how Israelis and Jews, people come to my house and they say, "Oh, what's that space underneath your staircase?" And I say, "Oh, that's the secret annex. If the Nazis come, that's where I'm going to move." And that's how we live. That's how we survive. And the people I work with have the most amazing senses of humor. At one point, Jason got falsely arrested. And he said to me, and it was Black History Month, and he said, "Isn't there a law against arresting a black man during Black History Month?" You're like, you wouldn't think this person would be funny, But how can you cope? And your question goes even more deeper. It's the issue of when I work with these young people, when I work with people in Northern Ireland, Catholics and Protestants, Israelis and Palestinians, everyone's like, it's so hopeless, it's never going to get any better year after year. And one day I said to myself, you know what? I don't have to fix it. I don't have to make it better. I can't. I have to focus on resilience. And humor is one of the number 1 resiliency tools. And so that's when you become a grown-up. That's when you become a grown-up and you don't say, "Oh, yeah, I didn't say that person's not at Harvard. Oh, I suck." That's not my job. My job is to help foster resilience. And if my sweet, lovely kid can make a joke when he's just been brutalized by institutional racism, my work here is done.
Awesome, thank you.
And thank you for coming.